Just after 2 Friday morning in this parking lot off Franklin Road, Metro Police found this silver car sprayed with bullets. 35-year-old Eric Butler was shot. He was taken to the hospital and died shortly after getting there.
At 2:25 in the morning, a silver car sat in a parking lot on Indianapolis's east side. Inside that car was a man who had spent years surviving things that should have killed him. A man who had beaten serious criminal charges. A man who had survived a shooting just weeks earlier. A man who had built a name for himself in Indianapolis rap. But on June 19th, his luck finally ran out. When police arrived at the scene on South Franklin Road, they found 35-year-old Eric Butler suffering from gunshot wounds inside his vehicle. He was rushed to the hospital, but this time there would be no recovery. This time there would be no second chance. Eric Butler, better known as Lil E, was dead. And here's the question that has been hanging over Indianapolis ever since. Who wanted Lil E dead so badly that someone allegedly came after him twice in less than 2 months? Because that's the part of this story that makes it different. This wasn't the first time someone had tried to kill him. Before we get into that, I need to ask you something. If you're always watching these stories, if you keep coming back to learn about these cases, but you're not subscribed yet, you're making it harder for channels like this to keep bringing you these stories. So take 2 seconds, like the video, subscribe, and click the bell icon. It really helps CSI Crime Archives grow, and it makes sure you don't miss the next case. Now let's talk about Eric Butler. Because if you only know him from the headlines, then you're missing a huge part of the story. Long before he became a homicide victim, he was one of the most recognizable rappers in Indianapolis. For more than a decade, Lil E was a fixture in the city's rap scene. This wasn't a guy making music in his bedroom for a handful of friends. He had built a real audience. Thousands of people followed his career. Millions of views accumulated across his music videos. People knew his name. People knew his songs. And maybe most importantly, people knew his story. The thing about Lil E is that his life was never simple. Even among people who supported him, there was always a feeling that he was living between 2 different worlds. On one side was music, opportunity, a fan base, a future. On the other side was a past that seemed determined to follow him everywhere he went. And unfortunately, that past would become impossible to ignore. Back in 2015, Eric Butler's name appeared in headlines connected to what prosecutors called the Grundy Crew investigation. Authorities alleged that a criminal organization was operating in Indianapolis and linked the group to serious criminal activity. The accusations were massive. Conspiracy charges, gang allegations, murder-related accusations. The kind of charges that can completely change a person's life. According to later court proceedings, however, key portions of the case fell apart after issues emerged with witness credibility, and charges against Butler were eventually dropped. Now think about that for a second. Imagine being accused of crimes serious enough to put you away for decades. Imagine your face appearing in news reports. Imagine people already deciding who you are before you've even stepped into a courtroom. For some people, that kind of experience changes everything. But for Eric Butler, it didn't end there. Because one of the themes you'll notice throughout this story is that trouble never seemed very far away. Even after the Grundy case collapsed, Butler continued having encounters with the criminal justice system. There were later drug-related convictions. There were arrests. There were investigations. And every time it seemed like he might be moving forward, something would pull him back. The frustrating part is that people close to him believed he was genuinely talented. After his death, friends described him as a legend in Indianapolis music. People who worked with him said opportunities were finally beginning to appear. Record deals were reportedly being discussed. Momentum was building. For the first time in a long time, there was a feeling that bigger things might be ahead. And that's where this story becomes difficult. Because true crime is full of people who never had opportunities. It's full of people who never had support. It's full of people who never had a chance. But Lil E wasn't one of those people. He had talent. He had listeners. He had people rooting for him. And yet somehow, he still ended up sitting in a parking lot at 2:25 in the morning with bullets tearing through his vehicle. So how did it get to that point? To answer that, we need to jump forward to 2023. Indiana State Police had been investigating a suspected drug operation on the city's east side. After conducting controlled buys, authorities obtained a search warrant and raided a home they believed was connected to drug activity. What happened next almost sounds like something from a movie. According to police, multiple people ran from the house. But Eric Butler wasn't among them. Investigators say they eventually found him hiding in an attic. After commands from officers, Butler climbed out and was taken into custody. The charges were serious. Very serious. Authorities accused him of dealing cocaine and several related offenses. For many people, this looked like the end. Because if convicted, Butler could have faced significant prison time. But then something unexpected happened. A jury acquitted him. Not guilty. The drug-dealing charges? Not guilty. The firearm charge? Not guilty. The major allegations prosecutors had built their case around? Rejected by the jury. And suddenly, Eric Butler was free again. Now put yourself in his shoes for a second. You've survived major criminal accusations. You've survived multiple legal battles. You've walked away from cases that many people thought would bury you. Most people would probably see that as a wake-up call. A second chance. Maybe even a third chance. And this is where I want to ask you something. How many second chances does a person get before they start believing they're untouchable? Because only a few months after that acquittal, something happened that would completely change the direction of this story. In April of 2026, Eric Butler was shot. Someone opened fire on him outside a business on East Washington Street. The attack left him wounded, but alive. And at first, that survival looked almost miraculous. Think about how many stories end right there. A shooting happens. The victim dies. The case becomes a homicide investigation. But that's not what happened here. Lil E survived. He walked away. And that's where the mystery really begins. Because police never solved that shooting. No arrest. No public explanation. No clear motive. Just questions. A lot of questions. Someone had already tried to kill him. And whoever that person was, they were still out there. Someone had already tried to kill Eric Butler once. That's the fact that keeps bringing people back to this case. Because when news first broke that Lil E had been murdered, a lot of people assumed it was another tragic shooting, another artist lost to violence, another name added to a growing list. But then details started coming out. And one detail changed everything. Just 2 months before his death, Eric Butler had survived a shooting. Not years before. Not sometime in the distant past. 2 months. Think about that. Imagine somebody opens fire on you. Imagine you survive. Imagine you recover. Then less than 60 days later, you're dead. It's impossible not to wonder whether those two shootings are connected. Right now, police haven't publicly said they are. They also haven't publicly said they aren't. And that's part of what makes this case so frustrating. There are more questions than answers. After surviving the April shooting, Eric Butler could have easily become another story about second chances. In fact, that's probably how many people around him viewed it. A second chance. A warning. A sign that maybe it was time to move differently. Maybe it was time to slow down. Maybe it was time to focus entirely on music. Because according to people who knew him, there were real opportunities beginning to appear. Friends talked about record deals. People in the local music scene talked about momentum. The conversation wasn't about what Lil E had done years ago. The conversation was about where he was going next. And that's what makes his death feel so unfinished. This wasn't a retired artist. This wasn't someone whose career had already ended. This was somebody who still had plans. Somebody who still had goals. Somebody who still believed there was more ahead. But whatever happened between April and June would erase all of that. Then came June 19th. Early morning. Around 2:25 a.m. Police received reports of a shooting on South Franklin Road. When officers arrived, they found Eric Butler suffering from gunshot wounds inside his vehicle. He was transported to the hospital. But unlike the shooting in April, there would be no recovery. This time he died. And almost immediately, the Indianapolis rap community went into shock. People who had worked with him couldn't believe it. Friends described him as a city legend. Others talked about how much influence he had on Indianapolis music. Even people who didn't always agree with him recognized the impact he had made. Because whether people loved him or criticized him, they knew who Lil E was. And now he was gone. One thing I want you to think about is how different people can see the same person in completely different ways. To some people, Eric Butler was a talented rapper who had managed to build a name for himself despite difficult circumstances. To others, he was somebody who never fully escaped a lifestyle that repeatedly put him in danger. And honestly, both perspectives can exist at the same time. Human beings are complicated. True crime often tries to simplify people. Good guy, bad guy, victim, criminal, hero, villain. But real life doesn't work like that. Real life is messy. And Eric Butler's life was definitely messy. You had a man who had built a successful music career, a man who had loyal supporters, a man who had survived major legal battles. But you also had a man whose name continued appearing in police reports and court records throughout different periods of his life. Those two realities existed together. And maybe that's one of the reasons this story has captured so much attention. Because people see what they want to see. Some people see a rapper whose life was cut short. Others see a cautionary tale. Others see a victim. Others see a product of his environment. The truth is probably more complicated than any of those labels. And unfortunately, we may never know exactly what was going through Eric Butler's mind during those final weeks. Did he think he was in danger? Did he believe the April shooting was a random event? Did he think whoever shot him the first time would come back? Did he feel safe? Did he feel nervous? Did he feel like somebody was watching him? Those are questions only Eric Butler could answer. And now those answers are gone forever. As investigators continue working the case, there are still major pieces missing. No suspect has been publicly identified. No motive has been publicly announced. No arrests have been made. And until that changes, speculation is exactly that. Speculation. One thing that's important in true crime is separating what we know from what we think we know. What we know is simple. Eric Butler survived a shooting in April. Eric Butler was killed in June. Both investigations remain unsolved. Everything beyond that is theory. And theories can be dangerous. Because once theories spread online, people start treating them like facts. Names get mentioned. Rumors get repeated. Stories grow larger and larger until nobody remembers what was actually confirmed. That's why it's important to stay grounded in the facts. The facts are already tragic enough. A 35-year-old man lost his life. A family lost a loved one. Friends lost someone they cared about. Fans lost an artist they supported. And a city lost one of its most recognizable rap figures. That alone is significant. You know what's especially sad? When you look at the timeline of Eric Butler's life, there are multiple moments where things could have gone differently. The charges that were dropped, the arrests he beat, the legal battles he survived, the April shooting he survived. Over and over again, there were moments where his story could have ended. But it didn't. Until it did. And that's what makes this case feel so heavy. Because it almost feels like fate kept giving him opportunities to continue moving forward. Then suddenly, there were no more opportunities left. No more appeals. No more acquittals. No more recoveries. No more second chances. Just a homicide investigation. A crime scene. And a lot of unanswered questions. There's another detail that deserves attention. When people die unexpectedly, especially public figures, there's often a tendency to freeze them in time. People remember only the good things. Or only the bad things. But rarely both. The reality is that Eric Butler's life contained both. There were accomplishments. There were mistakes. There were successes. There were failures. There were moments that inspired people. And there were moments that disappointed people. In other words, he was human. And maybe that's the biggest lesson here. Because when we talk about true crime, it's easy to focus only on the crime itself. The shooting, the investigation, the mystery. But every victim existed before becoming a victim. They had relationships, dreams, regrets, goals, arguments, memories. And all of those things disappear when a life ends. One moment you're planning your future. The next moment people are discussing your life in the past tense. That's exactly what happened here. Now people aren't talking about what Lil E is going to do next. They're talking about what could have been. And honestly, that's one of the saddest phrases in the English language. What could have been? Because there's no answer. We'll never know what music he might have released. We'll never know what opportunities might have appeared. We'll never know whether he could have completely changed the direction of his life. We'll never know. The story ended before those questions could be answered. And that's why this case continues to resonate with so many people. Not because the mystery has been solved, but because it hasn't. Because somewhere out there is the person responsible for ending Eric Butler's life. Somebody knows exactly what happened that night. Somebody knows why it happened. Somebody knows who pulled the trigger. And until that person is identified, the story remains unfinished. Maybe that's what makes this case different from so many others. Usually by the end of a true crime story, we have answers. An arrest. A confession. A conviction. Something. But not here. At least not yet. Right now, all we have are questions. And maybe that's exactly where we should end. Because this case isn't really about answers. It's about questions. Questions that force us to think. Questions that force us to look at choices, consequences, and human nature. So let me ask you this. Do you think people can truly leave their past behind? Or does the past eventually catch up with everyone? How many second chances should someone get before they finally change? If you survive an attempt on your life, is that a warning? Or is it simply luck? Do you think Eric Butler's death was connected to the shooting he survived in April? Or do you believe something completely different happened? And here's the biggest question of all. How many people are alive today only because one decision went differently than it could have? One turn, one choice, one conversation, one moment. How much of life is choice? And how much of it is chance? Let me know what you think in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video and want more true crime stories that go beyond the headlines, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and click the bell icon so you never miss an upload from CSI Crime Archives. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next case.